Hello, you're watching the Great Canadian Bagel here, and today we have another Canada federal election forecast. Now, with no further ado, before I begin, I would just like to once again shout out all my channel members. Thank you for the contributions. I could not do this without you. And if you want to support the channel, by all means, go in the description below and press the join button to become a member yourself. Otherwise, do your regular YouTube things, like, share, subscribe, comment below. With that, let us begin. So, I'd just like to start off here because we are going into a bunch of Canadian elections here. It's going to be linked in the description or in the pinned comment on this video. I'm going to be starting to run another set of polls in Canada. I'm going to run this for about a month, hope to finish for October 15th. I'm recording this on Sunday, September 15th. So you're going to run it for a month. And I'm going to try to get the biggest federal sample I can, and also Saskatchewan, BC, and New Brunswick samples to see if I can do polls for those individual provincial elections. I promise nothing for the provincial numbers because I'm pretty confident I can get enough sample size for a national poll. I have very little confidence I can get enough sample size for those provincial polls. But that poll will be in the description, and all I want you guys to do, go out and fill it in. And share it to everyone else you know. Spread it everywhere, across social media, whatever you want. I'm going to do all sorts of weighting, demographic stuff to make this poll as valid and real as possible. I will not be recording email addresses unless you voluntarily accept it. At the end of the form, there will be a point to join the mailing list to get on future one of these. I'll just mail them out to people in the mailing list. So that will be a opt-in at the end. Otherwise, I'm not recording your email address. Otherwise, let us begin to the video. So, a bunch of big things are happening in Canada right now. We are about to have Parliament come into session tomorrow. We have 2 by-elections tomorrow in LaSalle, Verdun, Emard, or LaSalle, Emard, Verdun, doesn't matter, and 1 in Elmwood, Transcona. This riding here, Elmwood, Transcona, and I believe this guy here is LaSalle, Verdun, Emard, or whatever orientation those words are in. And we've also had Singh withdraw from the CASA and turn on the carbon tax and saying he's against it now. A whole bunch of big things. And for the first time in a long time, we are going to spend this video discussing the NDP. Because, as I've just touched on before, while it might look like, in some cases, that I might intentionally only talk about what's going on in Conservative parties, that's just because right now, in Canada, the Conservative Party is the ones doing things, and the other parties are reacting to them. So talking about the reaction's not very interesting. Talking about the action is the interesting part. But for once, the NDP have done something. And it's interesting. And that is withdrawing from the CASA and turning on the carbon tax. Now, on first glance, turning on the carbon tax might seem like a terrible idea. A disastrous idea. The NDP, a lot of their base, are really concerned about the quote-unquote climate crisis. I say quote-unquote because that's how they describe it, not how I describe it. I think it's just a problem, not a crisis. There's a difference. But anyways, we're not here about my opinions. We don't care about my opinions. We care about what's going on in analysis. So you would think that turning on the carbon tax would be a bad thing, because if you think climate change is a crisis, then objectively speaking, the carbon tax makes sense. The carbon tax is the most efficient thing to do. If you don't think it's a crisis, then it doesn't matter if it's the most efficient thing to do or not. It doesn't matter. You can do less efficient things that take longer and are slower because it's not an issue. It's not a priority. It's not a concern. But the NDP, a lot of their base and a lot of their leadership thinks it is a very big concern, thinks it is a very pressing issue. So turning against a big ticket item, one of the most effective policy tools a government could levy, might seem like a bad idea. Now, there's 2 possible reasons for this. One, perhaps the NDP don't think at the current price threshold, it's enough. In other words, they think it either needs to be ridiculously high or it needs to be lower. Or else it's not doing anything. Not that needs to be lower. And there's been some economists who've estimated that it needs to be north of $200 per ton to really have the effect that the government wants it to see. That's why Trudeau's ramping up to $170 a ton. I suspect if we get to $170 a ton and the tax is still into place, it will keep ramping up. And will keep going up and up and up and up. Because the higher it is, the more effective it is at doing its main job. The core essence of taxing something is you want, essentially, less of that behavior. Yes, you can extract some wealth from it in the meantime, but you are discouraging behavior. That is a core part of taxation. It's not the intended effect of taxation, for the most part. Sin taxes exist where they're trying to use this core feature of taxation to discourage something. But for the most part, the government is not trying to discourage you from working by taxing your income. They tax your income because it's just the easiest thing to tax. Sales are pretty easy too, but they also don't want you to not buy things. They want you to buy things. They want you to earn money because they can tax that. And that's good for the government. They make revenue from that. But the NDP could perhaps be thinking that this isn't a high enough number so it's not actually that relevant. Perhaps, we haven't seen Singh argue that, but that is a potential line of point. But I think is the more likely one is if you look at this map right here. And where do you not see the NDP? Now I'm going to show you the 2021 Canadian federal election result map. And I want to see if the audience can guess the difference here. This was 2021. This is right now. This is 2021. Right now. 2021. You notice how there's a lot more orange in places like Northern Ontario, coastal BC. And then if we go to an even earlier election, let's go back all the way to 2015. Go back to here. We're now in northern Saskatchewan. We're now in northern Quebec. We're now in parts of rural Quebec. We're in more rural BC. We're more competitive in places like rural Manitoba and rural Saskatchewan. More competitive in rural Ontario, northern Ontario. They're winning Essex. They're winning a lot of industrial towns. You go back to their peak performance, 2011, the best NDP showing in ages. And what do we see here? Again, lots in northern Ontario, good amounts in coastal BC and rural BC, good amounts in rural Saskatchewan, Manitoba. They dominate Quebec, obviously. And they do relatively well in parts of Atlantic Canada. Notice, though, and also industrial cities in Ontario. Notice, though, where they're not now. Almost nothing in BC. Almost nothing in Saskatchewan. They have a little presence in the north here. They're almost out of rural Manitoba, except the north here. Elmwood Transcona is pretty on the cusp. They have lost London. They're close to losing Windsor. They're close to losing Hamilton. And they've lost Niagara. They're losing the northern Ontario. They're almost out of Quebec. And they're completely shut out of Atlantic Canada. Every single part of it. Notice the places they've lost the most, the NDP, are blue-collar and rural areas the NDP once held strong. And the NDP played well in working class and rural areas because it was the Union Party. And one of the things that trade unionism jives with are unionized private sector workers. That was one of the core parts of the NDP. That's why it did so well in places like London, Hamilton, Niagara, Windsor, Northern Ontario. Those parts of Ontario, the NDP did really well, not because those were intrinsically socialist places, not because those were places that really cared about left-wing social values. No. Did well in those areas because they were very heavily unionized, and they were the Union Party. Same thing with a lot of interior BC and a lot of the suburbs of Vancouver. Same thing in places like St. John's or Dartmouth and Halifax. That was one of the core bases of the NDP. They held it through their entire reign up until Singh. And Singh made a calculated gamble that he could try to pivot and win more urban, young, university-educated voters without losing the working class rural voters. He was wrong on both sides. He did not really win the urbanized, university-educated voters. He did not win them. If I quote the numbers right now, my model forecasts that the NDP is only at 19% among university-educated voters, and they're only at 20% among urban voters. So they did not meaningfully make progress there, not enough to compensate for the losses elsewhere. They're down to just 12% in rural areas, 15% in suburbs, and they've lost almost all of their support, they've lost a lot of support among high school educated and college educated voters. Colleges being like the trade schools and other that kind of stuff, right? Not like the American term where college is university. This is like college as in like trade schools, apprenticeships, that kind of stuff. Like non-bachelor degree, pro-secondary is what I use. And that's a big problem for the NDP. They lost a reliable core voter, and they gained nothing. Why is that? Well, by pivoting, their attempt under Singh to pivot to win the urbanized, university-educated voter, the young voter, possibly even the female voter, was to try to appeal to them on social issues, was to appeal to them on climate. And that didn't work. Because they don't own the climate issue. They don't own social issues. Yes, the NDP is more socially liberal than probably any other party here. And they're probably more climate concerned than any party but the Greens. But the Greens are more climate concerned. People who are really concerned about the climate are going to go green. And the Greens aren't that discordant on social or economics that the NDPers who are also very climate conscious or concerned care about. So it's not a hard vote for them to go green. And then the voters who don't really care about the climate as much, it's not their main concern, but are really concerned about social issues, the liberals, give them those concerns. The liberals mainly talk to those concerns. Guns, abortion, whatever thing of the month. They talk about those. The liberals give them those guns. So the NDP doesn't really have a unique appeal there. They're not offering anything that the liberals can't already offer. And the same thing with the Greens. They can't outbid the Greens on climate because the Greens have more credibility on it. The people who care or like left-wing policy solutions to climate. And they're just having a more robust brand on climate than the NDP does. So Singh's attempt to pivot has failed. To try to win these voters did not work. Meanwhile, by pivoting heavily into social issues, heavily into the climate, the NDP really flopped on union issues. Post-2008, now this has been going on true everywhere in the West, but post-2008, this was a really big issue, is in post-industrial areas, places that used to be big manufacturing cities but had now declined because of offshoring. And the offshoring was heavily sped up by 2008 because a lot of bankruptcies occurred, or staffing cuts were occurred from there. Saw huge upticks in massive social ills like drug addiction, suicides, etc. If you live in a former manufacturing or a former mining town, the odds that you personally know people that you grew up with who've killed themselves are really high, or have just expired to drug overdoses, is extremely high. It's one of the biggest tragedies in Canada right now. In North America, frankly. And the NDP, given one of the core issues, a lot of people who would be natural NDPers of prior years, after Jack Layton, especially after Mulcair, when this problem was really starting to grow in the late 2010s, really starting to become apparent, the opioid crisis. You don't see Singh in the trenches talking about the workers in Miramichi killing themselves, or the workers in insert town that have lost their jobs and are barely scraping by now because the manufacturing plant closed and moved overseas, or the maritime workers whose jobs are being slowly phased out to try to save a few dollars for the company. You don't see Singh talking about that. You don't see Singh going to strikes. You don't really see Singh standing up for these private sector unionized workers, or former unionized workers, because their union closed because the factory's gone. You didn't see Singh promise to push forward for tariffs or subsidies to back these things. You didn't see him talking about methods to actually deal with drug addiction in a way that actually helps people. All you see is the NDP do the same thing again and again when they talk about safe supply or whatever, or back it. But then the problem just keeps getting worse and worse. And everyone in those cities and everyone in those towns will see the drug problem getting worse and worse. And when they complain, it's getting worse and worse. What you see is people like Jagmeet Singh or other NDPers or liberals in many places will say, oh, but the safe consumption sites have saved X number of lives. Meanwhile, the death toll per year is higher than it was last year. Now, is it the safe consumption sites that are killing people? I'm not going to make that claim. Do your own research on that. But I can tell you that the problem isn't getting better. And that's an objective fact. More people died in BC from drug overdoses this year than last year. And more people died last year from drug overdoses than the year before. And the year before. And the year before. And et cetera, et cetera. And this wasn't really a problem before the Great Recession. The Great Recession was just the final brick that broke the camel's back. And you can look into all sorts of reasons why the opioid crisis really spawned there. It's a little out of the scope of the video, but you can look into it. And I recommend you do. Though it's not for the faint of heart. It's a very tragic thing. So why does this hurt Singh? Well, a lot of people who would be his natural voters, people who are oftentimes lower income, oftentimes were unionized or would like to be unionized, people who are in manufacturing or resource production, are being scorned. The oil worker in Fort McMurray is sneered at by Singh. The iron miner in Sudbury is sneered at by Singh. The potash mine in Saskatchewan is sneered at by Singh. The maritime worker in the Great Lakes is sneered at by Singh. He doesn't give them the respect they want. He doesn't do the respect they need. He doesn't talk to the issues. The steelworkers who feel so concerned that their jobs are going away in Hamilton because of the double whammy of cheap Chinese steel coming in, outbidding them, and the carbon tax eroding their price advantage over other jurisdictions, is a problem. And that's where you see probably his main motivation for turning on the carbon tax. Because a lot of his voters that he used to have are the ones most affected by the carbon tax. Now, you can talk about whether carbon tax is a good or bad environmental policy, but it is objectively true, and you cannot argue this in any meaningful or coherent way, that if you are a steel worker in Hamilton, the carbon tax is your job's death. There is no way you can make a carbon neutral steel production. By literal definition of making steel, you need to burn coal or coke. You are going to create a lot of CO2 emissions. It's literally impossible not to. You need to burn coal to make steel. Similar, you want to extract iron, or you want to harvest potash or uranium, or heaven forbid, oil, you have no hope. You will create a lot of CO2 emissions. It's impossible otherwise. Resource extraction creates CO2 emissions. End of the story. We can talk about reducing how much CO2 emissions the resource extraction does, but it will create it. Even reduced, it will create it. And since it will create it, the carbon tax kills their price competitiveness, or it kills profit margins. And a thing that's often not talked about, especially from Singh himself when he attacks Loblaws for a 3% profit margin, is legally a company is not allowed to reduce their profit margin. It is a violation of the best interests of the corporation. And a company executive cannot intentionally hurt the corporation. That's why if a tax goes up on a corporation, they raise their prices. It's not because they're greedy. They are legally not allowed to hurt the price competitiveness or the profit margins of the company. I'm not going to go much more deep depth than that, but you can talk to lawyers or whatever about this and they'll tell you the same thing. My wife tells me this. She's a lawyer in training. In corporate law, ideally, that she wants to be in. So this is all sorts of issues, and this is probably what's motivating Singh's flip on carbon tax. He saw, he's finally realized he's not winning the university-educated urbanite voter. They're not going to Singh. They're not going to the NDP. At least not in enough manners, not in a concentrated form for it to matter. You see this with the Western NDP, the part of the NDP that is actually usually productive and rational and good at politics. They are abandoning things like this. Canoe, Rob Canoe in Manitoba, Carla Beck in Saskatchewan, now David Eby in BC, and I'm sure Naheed Nenshi also, but I haven't looked at his statements on this, are all either hostile or at least not pro-carbon tax. They're very concerned about the well-being and the plight of workers in unionized or industrial areas. And that's the base and launching point the NDP needs to go off of. And it seems Singh might be finally realizing that. And it's also why him walking back from the CASA actually makes productive sense. Now, you're going to see a lot of people, I think for good reasons, but wrong reasons, say that Singh is getting hit bad by this walkout. So we're going to look at this abacus poll here. And people are going to see, Singh's approval dropped 4 points and his disapproval gained 3 points since he broke the CASA. Yes, Completely expected. That was always going to happen. Because as soon as he breaks the CASA, liberal voters who are voting liberal and will almost certainly never vote or NDP will have liked the NDP in concept. So when the NDP was just backing the liberals, or was just the liberals plus, they liked Singh and they liked the liberals. Sorry, the NDP. But they're never going to vote for the NDP. And this is the thing I've said before, and I really want to impress on. This number, 29%, it doesn't matter. 38%, it doesn't matter. What matters is... Where's the number? It's on the top of this page. Apologies. What matters is... That's the wrong number. This number. This number is what matters. Your approval rating as a leader of a political party is a lagging indicator of your party's popularity. The reason why Singh is at 29%, but only 18% of people are voting for him, is because 11% of the people who like Singh are either voting Liberal, Bloc, Green, Conservative, People's, or other. In other words, some other party. So that means that support, that approval, doesn't translate to votes. If you double your approval, but your votes aren't doubled, that change didn't matter. Singh in 2019 had a really high approval rating. We have it down here, actually. I don't think the Abacus has it going all the way back to 2019. He has it going all the way back to 2022, but 2022, he had +3, +5 in 2022, 2 years ago. It's a relatively high approval rating. Do you see the NDP as any better off 2 years ago than it was today in regards to votes, seats? No. It's worse. It's not worse. It's the same spot it's been. Now, my forecast might be a little more bearish on the NDP, but that's really just because it's been 2 years of Singh not doing anything. But even then, we're talking about 18 to 16.6. Yeah, it's not a huge difference. They're losing more seats now. But it's not because Singh is less popular. It's because Singh hasn't done what he needs to do. He's not fighting for the voters he wants to fight for. It's the same problem you see time and again that the conservatives have when they have a leadership race, is you'll see people being like, oh, well, they shouldn't vote for this guy because this guy is really liked by the base but not liked by other people. That was the thing they said about Poilievre. You notice the problem with that logic now? Poilievre is destroying everything. Because the dirty secret in politics that a lot of pundits who don't know what they're talking about will tell you is you actually do win elections by winning your base and then expanding it. You don't win your election by losing your base and then getting a different one. A party has a brand. A party has structure, supporters, etc. A successful party takes their core demographics, their core brand, reaffirms it, and then naturally expands it. And you have to expand it in a way that's not incoherent to the rest of your brand. That's why in previous videos I've said conservatives federally, generally speaking in all of the world, but in Canada, the Conservative Party is better off as a moderate fiscal and a moderate social conservative party. Because in Canada, the socially conservative, fiscally liberal voter doesn't really care about fiscal policy, they care about social policy. And the fiscally conservative, socially liberal voter doesn't really care about social policy. They care a lot about fiscal policy. So if you give fiscal policy wins to the fiscal conservative social liberal will be open to voting for you. And many of them will vote for you. If you give social wins for the social conservatives, the social conservative fiscal liberal will probably vote for you. That's how it works. The NDP has a different voter sphere. The NDP and the liberal voter sphere is very different. That's why they're not the same party. And why they will never be the same party. Why even if the NDP fizzles out, a new party that represents the exact same people will probably pop up again. Even if it doesn't really go much where. Maybe wins the odd seat. Because, again, these voters are concentrated. That's why the NDP can win seats in a first-past-the-post race system. But the NDP, on the fiscal to social scale, actually, let me make this easy. So we have, up here, we have conservative. Down here, we have liberal. Yes. And then this is social. This is the social axis. No, this is the fiscal axis. No, sorry. I'm constructing this badly. This is the up and down is social, and right and left is fiscal. Okay. Does it make sense? So we have, pulling out all my Excel tricks here. So we have this plane. That's bad. Let's not do that. We have this plane here, right? This is the fiscal axis. Let's make it like this. Fiscal here, social here. Got it? Let's do it. So, yeah. So the conservatives, let's do it like this. Makes more sense. So wait. I got a better way to do this. I have a better way to do this. Here we go. This is a much better prop. Okay. Wow. This is a better prop. So ignore these labels. So this is the fiscal axis. This is the social axis. So the conservatives should be here. The NDP should be here. And the liberals should be here. Makes sense? So they're both in the same axis. Fiscally liberal, socially liberal. NDP should be on this side, liberal should be on this side. Got it? Does that make sense? Okay. That was a really long-winded way to say that. And this is an important distinction. And this is a distinction I think Singh is finally realizing after being leader for 5 years. That the NDP's base is fundamentally and categorically different than the liberals. And the reason for this is the NDP doesn't actually care that much about social policy at all. They care about fiscal policy. And the only reason they care about social policy is because the fiscal policy has been so bad for them for so many years. You don't see the deaths of despair in industrial and mining towns, or former industrial and mining towns, because things are going well in those areas. They're happening because those areas are doing really bad. Really bad. And they're being ignored. These voters don't care about your latest climate issue. They don't care about your latest insert socially left-wing position here that people on the left care about. They don't care about that. They want their job security. They want their towns to no longer be dying. Why do you think in the US Trump is winning quite well, or doing well, I should say, in the Rust Belt? It's not because Trump has a unique appeal per se to Rust Belters. It's not some X factor that Trump was born with. It's not because the Republican brand is good in the Rust Belt. It's actually really bad. It's because the Democrats were in charge from 2008 to 2016 when the most damage occurred in a lot of these manufacturing cities. This is when the offshoring and all that stuff really picked up because the economic crisis really crippled a lot of these factory workers and a lot of these towns. A lot of the cities in the Midwest the Midwest, the Rust Belt, that are plagued by population loss happened in this time period. Now, is it Obama's fault? I don't think that's accurate. But what it is to say is the voters, the people who lived in these towns, these cities that have been seeing population loss because all of the jobs left or closed, don't feel like they were supported. They feel neglected. They feel discarded. And then comes along Trump and he goes to them and talks to them and they feel like he cares. And that's the same thing and a much better optic package happening in Canada between Poilievre and Singh. Poilievre is going to a lot of these unionized, a lot of these industrial towns, and is looking them in the eyes, listening to their concerns, and telling them, we're going to make things better for you. Why do you think Poilievre came out very strongly for tariffing steel, aluminum, and electric vehicles from China? Part of it is national security purposes. Part of it is the U.S. almost certainly was going to pressure us anyway, so might as well get ahead of the ball. Part of it is... but a big part of it is it helps his play with these unionized working class people who work in factories, who work in steel, who work in car manufacturing, who work in aluminum. Protect them from Chinese imports that were threatening to displace them. This is the same reason why Trump has embraced tariffs. It's not the only reason, but it is one of them. And these are things that Singh should have been leading on. And perhaps now that he's left the CASA, and now that he's finally realized, perhaps, just maybe, that he's done this, that the Faustian bargain where he was going to try to take core liberal voters without alienating his core voters, when the core NDPer and the core liberal have different concerns. It's not a natural base expansion to go from economic trade unionist to suburbanite upper middle class university educated. That's not a coherent jump. Especially when you're appealing to one on economics and one on social policy. Because unlike conservative inclined working class people don't care, or I'm going to phrase this, conservative inclined, fiscally conservative, socially liberal voters don't care about fiscal policy. NDP inclined, socially conservative, fiscally liberal voters don't care about, I said it backwards, the NDPers voter who is socially conservative, fiscally liberal, doesn't care about social policy, and the conservative voter doesn't care about fiscal policy. No, wait. I'm reading my script wrong. Sorry about this. I'm not cutting this out either, so we're gonna deal with it. The socially liberal, fiscally conservative voter, that the conservatives are winning, doesn't care about fiscal policy, does care about social policy. The NDPers are trying to appeal to them by giving them social liberalism and not trying to appeal to them by giving them fiscal liberalism. Or the fiscal liberalism that you see Singh talk about is things like, Loblaws is charging too much money, blah, which doesn't resonate with people because it... what? Why is it different now? And people generally don't really like the idea of wage controls or windfall taxes. That doesn't appeal to really anyone, ever. So it's really a case that Singh is losing a lot of these voters because they aren't actually that concerned with fiscal issues anymore. And he's giving them the opposite on social issues. The NDP under Jack Layton or other NDP leaders was the strongest because it didn't really talk about social issues. It focused on economic issues. Because yes, the socially conservative fiscal liberal usually doesn't care about fiscal issues. But if you're not giving him negative wins, you're not hurting him on social grounds, he might vote for you on fiscal grounds. Especially if the conservatives are led by someone like an O'Toole or a Scheer who doesn't want to really give them any social wins. It's really a travesty that for the NDP that Singh lost voters in 2019. That shouldn't have happened. That's an indictment of his leadership. But that indictment happened because he was trying to pivot. And he still is. And it's not working. Though maybe now he's different. But it'll be time to tell. We'll have to see where this evolves going forward to see how he wants to change, how he wants to pivot. If this does play through. I don't think it will. Because Singh, his background, his way he acts, he doesn't seem to really care about this stuff. He's a trade union guy because he is a socialist, not because he's a trade union guy. There's a very big difference. And I don't use the term socialist lightly. I like to be very precise when I use these terms. But with that, I bid you adieu, and make sure you fill out the poll. I definitely now bid you adieu, and I'll see you next time with something else.